Here we all are, look. There I am, over a decade younger. And there's Dave and Dan. And we were installing our first Vertipools at Bouldnor on the Isle of Wight. I know what, let's go and have a look at the Vertipools now. It's low tide in about half an hour. It takes about 30-40 minutes to get to Bouldnor from here in Sandown Bay. Let's go and have a look. I'm heading out to a place called Bouldnor, the west of the Isle of Wight. It's near Yarmouth, to the site of the very first vertipool array that we installed back in 2013. The Isle of Wight is a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve, one of about 700 or so. Being a whole island UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve is a rare thing. I don't think there are many in the world at all, so we're in a very small club there. There's a dedicated Isle of Wight Biosphere website if you're interested in finding out more about the UNESCO Biosphere designation that was awarded back in 2019. In 2012, my colleague and friend Ian Boyd first mentioned the idea of creating habitat on sea defences, and the discussion back then was about climate change, sea level rise, and the idea of using hard sea defences to allow the living intertidal habitat to inhabit what generally are, pretty barren concrete or steel or sometimes timber infrastructure designed to, keep our homes, businesses out of the sea. And with climate change and sea level rise literally on the rise, the suggestion is that we're going to see more and more sea defences going up around the world, and nowhere is that more pressing and evident that it's an issue than living on an island like the Isle of Wight. And we made 5 vertipools. We had a very small amount of money to play with, so we had to make that money stretch. And as far as I'm aware, those 5 vertipools are still there. So here we are in Bouldnor, coming up to the site, the Viewpoint car park. Just going to park up in here. There we go. You can see the mainland over there, so we're looking over to the New Forest here, and there's Yarmouth over there. You can see the ferry crossing, and this is the site of the original 5 vertipools. You might be able to see in a minute that they've been joined by 40 other vertipools. They were installed back in 2020, I think, as part of another science project that we did with the University of Bournemouth. It was a European funded project called Marine F. And these vertipools now, the original ones, quite amazing. I mean, they are so covered in these brown seaweeds, you can almost hardly see them. It's quite incredible. Look at that, there is a vertical under there, and look, there's the water. It's quite full of shingle and sediment and stuff, so it's quite shallow in there. but there is water. But there's the concrete structure. It's got this amazing covering of fucoid seaweeds. Beautiful. Again here, another one. Really beautiful. Look at it from the outside. That's amazing. This pool here is interesting, mostly because it's so high up on the seawall. You can see it's much higher than the other ones, and we did that deliberately as a test. Really, we put it up in the splash zone to see whether or not it would have any function at all. I thought at the time was it probably wouldn't, that it would, you know, only occasionally fill with water. But it's really fascinating to see that it does actually function as a rock pool, and there has been some really interesting recordings of species in here, including I think the porcelain crab at one point. Yeah, have a look inside. It's interesting. Look, concrete, bare concrete here, and then inside you've got a lot of algae. And what's super evident is that this one is very different to all the others. It's different on the outside, and it's different in the basin as well, because it's that much higher up the seawall. And it's just very interesting. You know, look at all this lovely green algae. You just don't see that in the lower ones because they get shaded out. As you can see, they come over the top and make these great big toupees that then cover the whole thing. Whereas this one is very different, completely different, and yet only just a couple of meters really away from the next one. And it has function. We've seen some really interesting stuff in there. That's what it looks like when you see it, how far above the kind of living line it is, and yet it's got a lot of habitat inside the basin. Compare it to this one, which is kind of along that living line, right at the top of it. Look how different it is. Lots of fucoid seaweeds. There is some green seaweeds in there. Looks pretty nice in there. More shaded. Juvenile crab again just here, look. So looking in these smaller vertipools, you can see that when we see a little tiny juvenile crab like that, we know that they're providing life cycle resources, which is precisely what they should be doing. And you can see how high up on the wall it is, on the seawall. And also you can see how they bend the living line upwards. This is something Dr. Alice Hall had noted, that where there are vertipools, you get an extra bit of, see, look, there's the line, and then all of a sudden, where the vertipools are, the living line goes up. Look at that. Couldn't be more evident, could it? There's no tide pools here, so these represent, you know, a habitat that isn't really present here, and so obviously these little juvenile crabs like that. They like a bit of water, and I've seen so many of them. It's one of the few S-type vertipools where you can actually see a bit of the infrastructure of the vertipool. See that pock-marked finish? That's the standard finish we put on these S-type vertipools, or similar anyway. They usually have something that looks like that. Sand toppers or sand shrimps. There we are, that one's squeezing his way out of the water. And yet more juvenile crabs. Such a beautiful spot here. It's a bit treacherous walking on fucoid seaweeds. Take the life in your own hands a bit. You can see some of that structure again. I guess there's sort of sponges or something growing on there, white stuff. Another beautiful looking S-type vertipool. Micro habitats, all of their own, very shaded, so the water's cool. This is where you get that environmental buffering effect. So as climates change, things get hotter, things like this could act as refuge for things that need cooler water, because they're so well covered in these amazing blankets of fucoid seaweed. And you can see how wet the vertipools are underneath, and we think this is another example of how the seaweeds kind of through capillary action actually sort of siphon the water out of the pools, so you can see that they drip. So over time the water level inside them does go down when they are as populated with seaweeds as this, but it doesn't seem to matter. Their functionality is still very good, and in fact there's an argument for saying that this very wet habitat again is a sort of climate buffering type of habitat. It stays damp throughout the tide window, through the low tide window, and provides a really excellent, safe, wet habitat for life that needs that sort of thing. Without that, you end up with that concrete, dry, nothing going on. Come down to the vertipool and you get all of this amazing wet, cool, shady habitat dripping away, and it allows all this stuff underneath to happily grow as well. It really is remarkable, and you can see when you look underneath, you can see the pattern of the bubble wrap that we used in the mould to make that print. Beautiful, really lovely. Noticed this device here. This is a recording device. It was looking at things like humidity and temperature. I think in principle they still work. They connect to a phone app and you can get the data that way. You can see those 316 steel bracket and fixings, pretty much as good as the day we put them in, and the great thing about those is that we can take them off at any point if we need to. Not that we ever have done, but because it's 316 it doesn't go rusty. again you can see the original concrete structure. Another one of those data recorders. We tend to think about the pool, don't we, as the kind of the productive part, but actually it's not that. It's not just that, it's the whole structure, including underneath where you get this lovely wet, damp environment. And let's move on with some trepidation. It's very slippery around here. Hey. Okay, here we go. Let's not fall over. Look at this one then. Look how different it is. It is still on the kind of living line, the strand line, but that pool there is higher than this one. So what it seems to have happened is the living line has got bent up towards that pool, and again there's research that Dr. Alice Hall has done suggesting that that has indeed happened. The presence of the vertipool has bent the living line upward. What do we see? We see kind of very little in the way of green seaweeds inside. It looks sort of very much cleaner, doesn't it? In the interior there are some orange sponges going on in there by the look of it. Now I'm going to carefully move this stone because the last time I did it, there was a really big fish in it, and for some reason, no, it literally, unfortunately I didn't have the camera on, and it shot off and just sort of hid. Shame, because it's the biggest fish I've seen at low tide in a vertipool. It must have been just a very big shanny, I think. It went too fast for me to properly see. That's what it looks like. So there we are, just down to the last two, or the first two in the row, vertipools. They're the Bouldnor model vertipools. But look again how, you know, we can't see this fucoid level going up as it goes along with the vertipools. Feels like more research needs to be done on that, but it's an interesting thing. There they are. And what I haven't done is lifted this great fringe to see if we can see anything interesting underneath. There we go, look, there's the original sculptural structure still under there, under this great fringe of seaweed. I remember making that very much on the design of the original little clay models. It's kind of almost like a bracket fungus design. One of these, I wonder if I can find it, was made by the school children, or at least their designs, and we put their designs on. I wonder which one it was. Let's see if we can lift up another fringe and have a look. What's under there? Oh, here it is. This is the one. So this was designed by the children of what was then Yarmouth Primary School. Can you see the designs on there? There's a fish and a kind of starfish and something there. Oh, it's a snail. The designs are still there after all this time, in a way protected by this giant fringe. I think on this side there's a seahorse. Let's see if it's still there. These kids are going to be in their 20s now. There you go. That's a seahorse. You can just about make him out. His head and his eyes. He's very horse-like. There it is. And then I think on this bit under here it says come home. I'll have a photograph somewhere of that. It says come home. Look at that, what a beautiful thing. So this was Articology Co-Create really, before it was properly formulated as it is today, where we engage folks, you know, in the process of making these things. So we were doing it right almost day one. And that's just simply because of who we are and the way that we worked previously before articology was a thing. We're used to doing that. We're used to working with communities on projects that are real, and articology was the next logical step, really. And then we went through this period of years and years of R&D and working with academics to find out if these things actually work or if we're just making it up. And of course the data came back to say, no, you're not making it up, they actually do work. And in a way we got sidetracked by the science for a bit, which is obviously important because we lean into the science really, really heavily. Everything we do is underpinned by kind of really robust science and the data. And then once we sort of got to a point where we felt confident we knew what we were doing, we then went back to our roots. So around sort of 2020 COVID period, when we had time to stop and think, we decided that we really did need to engage with this community process where we get folks involved, because it's such an important topic, and it's a worldwide issue. Climate change, biodiversity loss, sea level rise, all of those really hard subjects to grasp. If you can find a way to get folks involved as kind of stewards in solving some of these problems, and that seems like a really good thing to do. And so that's what we chose to do, and that's what we're doing. And then latterly, in the last couple of years, we formulated this sort of it is a kind of standardized methodology that allows us to work with communities to produce the most complex eco-engineering objects, artifacts like these that we possibly can. And the Solent is about to become a real stronghold of co-create projects. We have articology co-create projects right across the country, up in the northeast of the country, and now the Solent is set to become a series of living labs through installations and connections to the communities that live in the places where these installations are going to go. And the early data is that the Vertipools made using the articology co-create process are more functional than Vertipools that we just make ourselves. So it's like a win-win, isn't it? Here we go. So there we are at the end of the row. I think something like 45 Vertipools altogether, when you include the original Bouldnor array and all of these S-type Vertipools that are here. It's a great spot. You have to be a little bit careful if you come down and to look at them at low tide, because it is a bit slippy, but it is public beach and you're allowed to come down here and have a look.